the invisible guardian Nora Blackwood moved like a ghost through Thornfield Manor. 3 months into her position as head housekeeper, and she'd perfected the art of invisibility. The sprawling coastal estate required meticulous attention, but Nora preferred it this way, working in silence, leaving no trace of herself except for the immaculate results of her labor. At 32, she'd mastered the skill of existing in the periphery. Her auburn hair stayed neatly tucked in a practical bun, her clothes deliberately neutral toned to blend with the manor's subdued palette. Even her footsteps had an unnatural quietness, something she'd cultivated over years of wanting to disappear. Owner of Thornfield Manor, Julian Westbrook, suited her preference for minimal interaction perfectly. At 38, the founder and CEO of Westbrook Technologies spent most of his time either locked in his home office or absent altogether, leaving the massive cliffside property empty, save for staff. The few times they'd crossed paths, he'd barely glanced up from his phone, offering curt nods instead of conversation. That suited Nora just fine. The less attention drawn to her, the better. This morning, she slipped into Julian's study to dust while he attended an overseas video conference in the library. His workspace revealed the contradiction of the man: clinical organization interrupted by chaotic evidence of all-night work sessions. Empty coffee cups collected beside cutting-edge tech prototypes. Brilliant designs scrawled on expensive stationery. She carefully cleaned around his drafting table. A notification flashed on his main monitor. Nora averted her eyes. She was fanatical about respecting privacy, but not before glimpsing the headline, "Westbrook Technologies secures historic defense contract." So this was why the manor had seen a parade of black town cars and suited visitors last week. She'd made herself especially scarce during those days, serving refreshments and disappearing before anyone could register her presence. Nora moved to the wall of windows overlooking the property's eastern edge, where neglect had transformed the once magnificent gardens into a tangle of overgrowth. Something in her chest ached at the sight. Before Thornfield, before everything had shattered, gardens had been her sanctuary. "Mrs. Turner said you wanted to discuss the greenhouse." The deep voice from the doorway made Nora start. She turned, to find Julian Westbrook watching her with those penetrating gray eyes that seemed to catalog everything they observed. "I'm sorry, Mr. Westbrook, I didn't mean to disturb your space." She stepped away from the window, hands clasped before her. And it was nothing urgent about the greenhouse, just routine maintenance questions. He studied her with unexpected focus. "You've been here 3 months now?" "Yes, sir. And yet I feel like I barely know you're here most days." His tone wasn't accusatory, merely observational. "I try to be efficient without being intrusive." Something like amusement flickered across his face. "Well, you've succeeded admirably. The house hasn't run this smoothly in years." He paused, his gaze returning to the overgrown gardens she'd been studying. "You were looking at the East Gardens." It wasn't a question, but Nora felt compelled to respond. "They have potential." For a moment, something softened in his expression. "They were my mother's project. After she died, no one quite knew what to do with them." The personal admission surprised her. In 3 months, this was the most human interaction they'd shared. "Gardens need tending," she said softly, then immediately regretted the familiarity. But Julian merely nodded, his attention already shifting back to his phone as it buzzed with notifications. "About the greenhouse, whatever maintenance is needed, you have my approval. Just add it to the household accounts." And just like that, the brief moment of connection evaporated. He was once again the distracted tech mogul, and she was once again invisible. As Nora slipped from the room, she didn't notice Julian's gaze following her, curious and thoughtful, before returning to his endless stream of demands. Echoes of talent. 2 weeks passed since Julian's brief encounter with his elusive housekeeper. The defense contract consumed his waking hours, transforming his already minimal sleep schedule into something bordering on dangerous exhaustion. Meetings blurred together in an endless stream of stakeholder expectations and engineering challenges. On a particularly grueling Wednesday, Julian terminated a video call with his executive team earlier than scheduled, the pounding in his temples warning of an impending migraine. He needed air, something other than the recycled oxygen of his home office and the suffocating pressure of billion-dollar decisions. Seeking solitude, Julian wandered toward the eastern wing of Thornfield Manor, an area he rarely visited since his mother's passing 6 years ago. As he approached the glass-walled corridor connecting to the long-abandoned greenhouse, he stopped short. The greenhouse door stood ajar. Light, not the harsh afternoon sun but a softer filtered glow, emanated from within. Julian approached, cautiously, unsure who would have reason to enter the neglected space. What he saw halted him in the doorway. The greenhouse interior, which had been a graveyard of withered plants and broken pottery for years, was transformed. Clean pathways cut through newly organized sections. Ancient workbenches had been sanded and restored. The clouded glass panels had been meticulously cleaned, allowing dappled sunlight to dance across the stone floor. And in the center of this, resurrection stood Nora Blackwood, so absorbed in her work she hadn't noticed his arrival. She was different here, almost unrecognizable from the reserved housekeeper who moved like a shadow through his home. Her usually restrained hair fell in loose waves around her shoulders. She wore simple linen gardening clothes rather than her formal uniform. Most striking was her expression. Intense concentration mixed with unmistakable joy as her hands worked quickly among seedlings. Julian watched, transfixed, as she transferred tiny plants with surgeon-like precision, her movements confident and practiced. This wasn't someone who had learned gardening from a casual hobby. This was expertise born from years of dedicated study. "You didn't mention you were a botanist," Julian said finally. Nora's head snapped up, her hands freezing mid-task. The transformation was immediate. Her shoulders tensed, her expression shuddered, and Julian felt an inexplicable regret at having disturbed whatever peace she'd found among the plants. "Mr. Westbrook, I'm sorry. I should have asked before starting this project." She began wiping her hands on her apron, clearly flustered. "You gave approval for maintenance, but I've clearly overstepped." Julian stepped fully into the greenhouse, breathing deeply of the earthy scent that had replaced years of mustiness and decay. "Overstepped? Nora, this is..." He gestured to the space around them. "This is remarkable." She blinked, clearly surprised by his reaction. "It's still very preliminary. The structural repairs are complete, but the planting zones need considerable work." Julian approached one of the newly constructed beds where tiny green shoots pushed through rich dark soil. "What are these?" Something in Nora's expression shifted, hesitant, but unable to completely suppress her enthusiasm. "Native medicinal plants. This section will be herbs that would have grown here naturally 100 years ago. And you know how to identify those?" A small, reluctant smile curved her lips. "Yes." Julian moved slowly through the space, noting the careful organization, the efficient use of water systems, the methodical labeling. "This isn't a hobby for you." Nora remained silent, watching him with those careful green eyes that suddenly seemed much more observant than he'd previously noticed. "My mother would have loved this," he said quietly, running his fingers over a restored Victorian planting table. "She always said the greenhouse was the heart of Thornfield." Something in Nora's expression softened. "The architecture suggests it was. The way it connects to the main house through that glass corridor, it was designed to be an extension of the living space, not just a utilitarian growing area." Julian studied her with new interest. "How do you know so much about historical, botanical architecture?" The question seemed to startle her. Nora turned away, busying herself with rearranging tools that were already perfectly aligned. "I've always been interested in plants and historical spaces." It was clearly deflection, but Julian didn't press. Instead, he asked, "Would you show me what you're planning for the rest of the greenhouse?" Surprise flickered across her face before she nodded cautiously. For the next half hour, Julian listened as Nora explained her vision for restoring the greenhouse to its former glory, connecting it to the overgrown gardens beyond, re-establishing heritage plant collections, even incorporating modern, sustainable growing techniques that would honor the original design while improving functionality. As she spoke, animation transformed her usually guarded features. Her hands sketched possibilities in the air. Her knowledge flowed without reservation. This was a different woman than the silent figure who had maintained his household for months without drawing attention to herself. "Why are you working as a housekeeper, Nora?" Julian asked finally, the question he'd been holding back throughout her passionate explanation. Just like that, the shutters came down. Her hands stilled, her posture straightened, and the professional mask slipped back into place. "Sometimes, life takes unexpected turns, Mr. Westbrook," she said quietly. Before he could respond, his phone rang, his CFO calling about the contract negotiations. The real world intruding. "I need to take this," he said regretfully. Nora nodded, already retreating both physically and emotionally. "Of course. I'll return to my regular duties." As Julian stepped away to answer the call, he glanced back to see Nora gently touching the leaf of a small plant, her expression briefly unguarded, revealing a complex mixture of love and loss that stirred his curiosity more than anything had in years. Wounds and whispers. The midnight alert jolted Julian from his desk where he'd fallen asleep reviewing contract specifications. His security system flashed a warning, motion detected in the east wing. Rubbing his eyes, Julian pulled up the camera feed, expecting to see a false alarm. Instead, he saw Nora hurrying through the glass corridor toward the greenhouse, her figure illuminated by moonlight. Julian frowned. It was nearly 2 a.m., well beyond any reasonable working hours. Curiosity overrode his usual respect for staff privacy. He grabbed his phone and made his way toward the east wing, moving quietly through the sleeping house. As he approached the greenhouse, he could see soft light glowing from within. Not the harsh utility lighting, but the gentle illumination of what appeared to be lanterns strategically placed among the plants. Julian paused at the entrance, suddenly feeling like an intruder. Nora knelt beside a large wooden crate that hadn't been there earlier, carefully removing what looked like orchids, exotic specimens with delicate blooms in shades of crimson and gold. She spoke softly to the plants as she worked, her voice barely audible. "That shipping delay didn't do you any favors, did it? Let's get you settled before sunrise." Julian cleared his throat gently to announce his presence. Nora startled, nearly dropping the plant in her hands. "Mr. Westbrook, I'm sorry, I know this is inappropriate, I can explain. Midnight gardening?" Julian kept his tone neutral as he stepped into the greenhouse. Nora carefully placed the orchid on a nearby table. "These specimens are extremely sensitive to temperature and light changes. They needed to be transplanted immediately after arrival." She straightened, her professional composure returning. "I should have requested permission." Julian approached the crate, examining the rare plants within. Even with his limited botanical knowledge, he recognized these weren't ordinary specimens. The shipping labels bore international markings and warnings about fragile contents. "These aren't the kind of plants a housekeeper typically orders," he observed, looking up to find Nora watching him warily. She hesitated before responding. "No. They're part of a conservation collection. Endangered varieties from the Mekong Delta region." Julian's brow furrowed. "And they're being delivered to my greenhouse at 2 a.m. because..." Nora's shoulders tensed. For a moment, he thought she might retreat into her usual reticence, but instead, she sighed. "Because Dr. Harlow at the Coastal Botanical Research Center would recognize the shipping codes if they arrived during normal hours." "And why would that matter?" "Because he believes I'm no longer in the country." Her voice was quiet but firm. "And I'd prefer it stay that way." The admission hung between them, fraught with unspoken complications. Julian should have ended the conversation there. Professional boundaries existed for a reason. But something about Nora's careful composure, the precision of her hands as they cradled endangered plants, kept him rooted in place. "I assume there's a story behind that statement," he said finally. Nora turned back to the orchids, her fingers gentle as she freed one from its temporary container. "There is, but it's not one I share casually, Mr. Westbrook." Under normal circumstances, Julian would have respected her privacy and walked away. But nothing about this scenario felt normal. his reclusive housekeeper secretly cultivating rare botanical specimens in his mother's greenhouse at 2 a.m. I think we're beyond formalities at this point, Nora. Please call me Julian. Her hands stilled briefly before resuming their work. Julian, then. He leaned against a nearby workbench. Were you a researcher at the Coastal Center? A small, rueful smile touched her lips. I was the director of their international conservation program. She met his surprised gaze directly. Dr. Nora Blackwood, botanical geneticist, specializing in endangered tropical flora. Julian processed this information, recalibrating everything he thought he knew about his housekeeper. That's quite a career change. Yes. When she offered nothing more, Julian gestured to the orchids. And these plants? Something in her expression softened. Part of my life's work. A collection I started 15 years ago. They were being held in Singapore until I could arrange safe transport. She carefully positioned the orchid in prepared soil. These varieties are nearly extinct in the wild. Less than 50 specimens of each remain. And you're housing them here because... Nora's hands trembled slightly. Because sometimes protecting what matters requires disappearing. Before Julian could respond, a sharp pain lanced through his temple, the migraine he'd been staving off all day finally making its full assault. He winced, pressing his fingers against his forehead. Nora noticed immediately. You're in pain. It's nothing, just a migraine. They happen when you work yourself to exhaustion, she finished, setting aside her gardening tools and washing her hands at a nearby sink. How long has it been building? All day, he admitted. It's why I came looking for fresh air earlier. Nora approached him with the confident assessment of someone with medical training. Light sensitivity? Nausea? Both getting worse by the minute. She nodded decisively. Sit down before you fall down. To his own surprise, Julian complied, lowering himself onto a nearby stool as the greenhouse began to tilt alarmingly around him. Nora extinguished most of the lanterns, leaving only one soft light far from his position. She disappeared briefly into a small storage area, returning with what looked like a small wooden box. From it, she extracted a small vial. What is that? Julian asked, his voice strained. Something that will help. She applied the contents to her fingertips and approached him. May I? At his nod, she began gently massaging the oil into his temples with practiced movements. The scent was unlike anything he'd experienced, earthy yet bright with notes of something distinctly tropical. Breathe deeply, she instructed quietly. Julian closed his eyes, surrendering to the unexpected relief as the tension began to release. Her fingers moved with precise pressure, finding exactly the right points to ease the building agony. This is from one of your plants, he murmured, the realization dawning as the pain began to recede. Yes, a compound derived from an orchid species that grows only on 3 remote islands in Southeast Asia. Her voice was soft in the dimmed greenhouse. It has properties similar to commercial migraine medications but without the side effects. You created this? My research focused on medicinal applications of endangered flora. This was one of our successes. Her hands slowed their movement. Better? Julian opened his eyes, surprised to find the stabbing pain had dulled to a manageable ache. Significantly. In the gentle lantern light with her guard temporarily lowered, Nora looked different, younger somehow but with shadows in her eyes that spoke of burdens he couldn't begin to understand. Why would someone with your credentials be hiding as a housekeeper, Nora? She stepped back, replacing the vial in its wooden case. Some questions are better left unasked, Julian. And if I'm asking anyway? Nora's expression closed like a door being shut. Then I would respectfully remind you that everyone deserves their secrets. She gestured toward the main house. You should rest. The compound will help, but sleep is what you need. Julian stood, testing his balance. The relief was remarkable, from incapacitating pain to functional discomfort in minutes. Thank you, he said sincerely. Nora nodded, already turning back to her midnight gardening. Good night, Julian. As he walked back through the moonlit corridor, Julian found himself more intrigued by Nora Blackwood than he'd been by anyone in years. A world-renowned botanist hiding as his housekeeper, cultivating endangered plants in secret, with skills that extended far beyond dusting and organizing his household. The question wasn't just why she was hiding, but from whom. Blooming truth, the gentle knock on Julian's office door came 3 days after their midnight encounter in the greenhouse. He'd deliberately kept his distance since then, respecting whatever boundaries Nora needed while simultaneously instructing his assistant to discreetly research Dr. Nora Blackwood. What he'd discovered had only deepened the mystery. 5 published books on botanical conservation, over 30 academic papers, international recognition for groundbreaking work in preserving endangered species. And then, 18 months ago, a sudden resignation, followed by complete disappearance from the scientific community. Come in, Julian called, closing the digital file he'd been reviewing. Nora entered, professional and composed in her housekeeper's uniform, carrying a small tray with tea. Nothing in her demeanor suggested their unusual interaction had ever occurred. Your afternoon tea, Mr. Westbrook. She placed the tray on his desk, keeping her eyes lowered. And there's a package that requires your signature. Julian studied, her noting how deliberately she'd reverted to formalities. Thank you, Ms. Blackwood, he replied, matching her tone. Any more midnight deliveries I should know about? Her eyes flicked up to his, wariness mingling with something that might have been amusement. No, sir. Pity. I found it rather interesting. Moment of silence stretched between them before Nora straightened her shoulders. About that night, I should apologize for the inappropriate use of the greenhouse and don't, Julian interrupted. Don't apologize for being exactly who you are. Her carefully maintained composure faltered. And who do you think that is? Someone extraordinary hiding in plain sight. Julian leaned forward. The question is why? What makes a woman who spent her life protecting endangered species suddenly abandon everything she built? Nora's hands clasped tightly before her. Perhaps she discovered that the people funding her research had different intentions for her work. Julian went still. What kind of intentions? The pharmaceutical kind. Nora's voice remained steady, though her knuckles had whitened. Where rare plants valued for their traditional medicinal properties are harvested to extinction for profit, rather than preserved for humanity. Your research was being misused? Not yet, but it would have been. Bitterness edged into her tone. When I discovered that Nexus Pharmaceuticals' conservation initiative was actually a front for biopiracy, exploiting indigenous knowledge and rare botanical specimens for patentable compounds, I confronted the board. Julian's expression darkened. I'm guessing that didn't go well. It went exactly as you'd expect when a scientist discovers her life's work is being co-opted by people with billions of dollars at stake. Nora's professional mask slipped, revealing raw anger beneath. They offered me a choice: continue my work under their revised guidelines or face professional destruction. So you disappeared instead. I took what specimens I could salvage and vanished. Her chin lifted slightly. My reputation was systematically dismantled. Former colleagues were told I'd had a breakdown. Funding sources received evidence of fabricated data. Within 3 months, Dr. Nora Blackwood became unemployable in her field. Julian absorbed this, fury building on her behalf. You could have fought back. With what resources? Against a multinational corporation? She shook her head. I made a different choice. To preserve what mattered most. The plants. The research. My integrity. By becoming invisible. By becoming patient, she corrected. There are still people I trust working to expose Nexus. Until then, I keep my head down and my plants alive. Julian stood, moving to the wall of windows overlooking the coastline. I understand disappearing better than most. Nora's reflection in the glass watched him cautiously. Do you? 6 years ago, when my mother died, I withdrew from everything except work. He turned to face her. Different circumstances, similar strategy. Hiding in plain sight, Nora murmured, echoing his earlier words. Yes. Julian studied her thoughtfully. But there's a fundamental flaw in our approach, Nora. Eventually, hiding becomes a habit rather than a strategy. Something vulnerable flickered across her face. Sometimes habits keep us safe. Safe, perhaps, but alive? Julian shook his head. I've spent 6 years building technology and wealth while forgetting why any of it mattered in the first place. And why did it matter? She asked softly. Because my mother believed technology should serve humanity, not the other way around. He gestured toward his desk, piled with contracts and specifications. This defense project I've been consumed by? It's the first thing in years that would have made her proud. Systems designed to predict environmental disasters, not weapons. Nora took a step closer, her professional reserve momentarily forgotten. That's actually remarkable. Yes, well, Julian smiled faintly. Even reclusive tech moguls occasionally remember their purpose. A tentative smile touched her lips. Even fugitive botanists need reminding sometimes. The moment stretched between them. An unexpected connection formed through mutual recognition. Two people who had retreated from the world for different reasons, finding themselves accidentally visible to each other. Julian made a decision. The East Wing has a research suite my mother used for her environmental advocacy work. It's been empty since she died. Nora went very still. Why are you telling me this? Because it has state-of-the-art laboratory equipment that's gathering dust. He held her gaze steadily. And because your midnight gardening deserves better resources. Julian. She shook her head. I can't accept that. Why not? It benefits us both. The equipment gets used, your research continues, and... He hesitated before adding quietly. And maybe we both stop disappearing quite so thoroughly. Vulnerability and longing warred in Nora's expression. You don't understand the risk. If Nexus discovered my whereabouts, Thornfield has security systems that would make government agencies envious. Julian interrupted. And Westbrook Technologies has legal resources that would give even multinational pharmaceuticals pause. Why would you do this? You barely know me. Julian considered her question carefully. Because in 3 days you've shown me more passion and purpose than I've witnessed in 6 years of corporate boardrooms. Because your midnight gardening reminded me that some things are worth protecting at any cost. And because... He paused, surprising himself with his next words. Because I'm tired of being the ghost haunting my mother's house, and I suspect you're tired of being invisible too. Nora's carefully constructed walls seemed to waver. For a moment, Julian glimpsed the woman beneath the protective layers. Brilliant, determined, and achingly alone. I can't go public with my research, she said finally. Not until Nexus is exposed. I'm not asking you to. I'm offering you a better hiding place, one with resources. She studied him with those perceptive green eyes. And what do you get from this arrangement? Julian hadn't fully examined his own motivations until she asked. The satisfaction of thwarting corporate biopiracy, he began, then added more honestly, and the company of someone who reminds me that there's more to life than quarterly earnings reports. A slow smile, the first genuine, unguarded smile he'd seen from her, transformed Nora's face. That's quite an unconventional employment benefit. I've never been particularly conventional. Julian extended his hand. Partners? Nora hesitated, just briefly before taking it. Her grip was firm, her calloused fingers testament to work that transcended household management. Partners, she agreed. But we proceed carefully. My research remains confidential. Agreed. As their hands separated, something shifted between them. An acknowledgement that whatever was beginning went beyond employer and employee, beyond even scientist and benefactor. Two people who had been hiding from the world had accidentally found each other. I should return to my duties, Nora said, professional decorum reasserting itself. Of course. Julian nodded, stepping back. We'll discuss the laboratory setup tomorrow. As Nora turned to leave, Julian added, "And Nora, thank you for trusting me with your story." She paused at the doorway, glancing back with an expression both guarded and hopeful. "Thank you for seeing me when I was trying so hard not to be seen." After she left, Julian stood at the window for a long time, watching the ocean and feeling, for the first time in years, like he was waking up from a very long sleep. Garden of Second Chances. 3 months transformed both Thornfield Manor and its inhabitants. The East Wing laboratory hummed with activity. The greenhouse flourished under Nora's expert care, rare specimens thriving in carefully calibrated environments. The once neglected gardens began their slow resurrection, with meandering paths cleared and heritage plantings restored. But the most remarkable transformation occurred in the people. On a crisp autumn morning, Julian made his way through the greenhouse toward the laboratory, carrying 2 cups of coffee, a ritual that had developed naturally over their weeks of collaboration. He found Nora exactly where he expected, bent over a microscope, her auburn hair escaping its practical bun as she made careful notations. "Breakthrough or setback?" Julian asked, setting her coffee beside her notebook. Nora looked up with a smile that still caught him off guard with its warmth. "Neither. Confirmation." She gestured to her notes. "The propagation technique is working. We've successfully reproduced 50 new specimens of the Mekong orchid." "That's worth celebrating." Julian leaned against her workbench, taking in the sight of the woman who had gradually ceased to be his housekeeper and become something far more essential: colleague, confidant, and increasingly, something neither of them had explicitly named. "It means we can begin distributing specimens to secure locations," Nora explained, the animation in her face making her look younger than her years. "Conservation gardens, indigenous preserves, places beyond Nexus's reach." Julian nodded, understanding the significance. "Safety through dispersion." "Exactly." She took a sip of her coffee, studying him over the rim. "You look tired. Contract negotiations again?" "Final phase," Julian confirmed. "The environmental monitoring system goes live next month." Nora's expression softened with something like pride. "Your mother would have been proud. I think she'd be more impressed with what's happening here." Julian gestured to the laboratory around them, where breakthrough conservation work happened daily under Nora's direction. Over the past months, Julian had gradually shifted his work, scheduled to spend afternoons in the laboratory with Nora, sometimes contributing his technological expertise, sometimes simply keeping her company as she worked. What had begun as curiosity had evolved into genuine partnership. "I received an interesting email this morning," Julian said casually, "from Dr. Harlow at the Coastal Botanical Center." Nora went still. "How did he contact you?" "Apparently rumors of advanced conservation work at Thornfield have been circulating in botanical circles." Julian watched her reaction carefully. "He's requesting a meeting to discuss potential collaboration." Alarm flashed across Nora's face. "Julian, if word has spread, I think you should meet with him," Julian said gently. "Because he included this." Julian handed her his tablet, opened to an attachment on Harlow's email. A leaked internal memo from Nexus Pharmaceuticals documenting a federal investigation into their research practices. The document detailed allegations of biopiracy, exploitation of indigenous knowledge, and falsification of research attributions. Nora's hands trembled slightly as she read. "Is this verified?" "My legal team confirmed it this morning. The investigation has been ongoing for months. Multiple whistleblowers came forward." "My colleagues," Nora whispered. "They kept fighting. And they're winning." Julian took the tablet, back, setting it aside. "Nexus is facing federal charges, Nora. Their reputation is in tatters. Their stock has plummeted." Tears gathered in her eyes. "It wasn't for nothing then. Everything we lost, it mattered." Julian reached for her hand, covering it with his own. "It always mattered. But now perhaps you don't need to hide anymore." The full impact of his words seemed to wash over her gradually. For 18 months, Nora had lived in shadows, working silently, hiding her brilliance, protecting her life's work at the cost of her identity. "I don't know who I am without the hiding," she admitted quietly. "It's been so long." "You're Dr. Nora Blackwood," Julian said firmly. "Botanical geneticist, conservation pioneer, midnight gardener, and the woman who reminded a reclusive tech mogul how to see what matters." A smile trembled on her lips. "That's quite a job description. I'm considering adding partner to the list." Julian's voice softened. "If you're interested." The word hung between them, laden with meaning beyond professional collaboration. Nora's eyes widened slightly as she recognized his intention. "Julian, I know the timing is complicated," he continued. "You're reclaiming your professional identity. You have decisions to make about your future. But whatever you choose, I want you to know that Thornfield isn't just a hiding place anymore. Not for either of us." Nora studied their joined hands. "When I came here, I was trying to disappear. I never expected." "Neither did I." Julian smiled ruefully. "I hired a housekeeper and found the most brilliant botanical mind of her generation secretly reviving my mother's greenhouse. While you were creating technology to protect environments rather than exploit them," Nora added softly. A gentle silence enveloped them. Two people who had found each other when neither was looking, connected through shared purpose and unexpected understanding. "What happens now?" Nora asked finally. "That depends largely on you." Julian released her hand, giving her space. "Harlow wants to meet next week. You could reclaim your position at the center if you wanted. Or we could build something new. Here." Julian gestured to the thriving laboratory around them. "Thornfield Conservation Initiative, independent research, your leadership, my resources. No corporate interference." Hope, fragile but unmistakable, bloomed in Nora's expression. "You would do that?" "I've spent the last 6 years building technology to connect people while forgetting how to connect myself," Julian said honestly. "Then you appeared, working silently in my home, hiding extraordinary gifts behind ordinary tasks. In seeing you, I remembered how to see myself." Nora rose from her workbench, moving to the window that overlooked the revitalized gardens below. "When I came to Thornfield, I thought I was choosing safety over purpose," she said quietly. "I never imagined finding both in the same place." Julian joined her at the window. "Is that a yes to the conservation initiative?" She turned to face him, vulnerability and determination mingling in her gaze. "It's a yes to not hiding anymore. For either of us." The laboratory door swung open before Julian could respond, revealing his assistant looking flustered. "Mr. Westbrook, oh. I'm sorry to interrupt, but the Secretary of Environmental Protection is on the line about the monitoring system contract and—" The assistant paused, finally noticing the charged atmosphere she'd interrupted. "I can tell her you'll call back?" "No need," Julian smiled at Nora. "Dr. Blackwood and I were just discussing a new conservation initiative that might interest the Secretary. Put her through to the conference room. We'll take it together." The assistant's surprise at hearing the housekeeper addressed as Dr. Blackwood was evident, but she nodded professionally. "Right away, sir." After she departed, Nora raised an eyebrow. "That was rather public." "I believe that was the point," Julian replied with a smile. "No more hiding." Nora took a deep breath, squaring her shoulders as 18 months of forced invisibility began to fall away. "No more hiding," she agreed. As they walked together toward the conference room, Julian felt a sense of rightness that had been absent for years. His mother's greenhouse flourished again. Thornfield Manor had transformed from a mausoleum of memories into a center of purpose, and the woman who had worked silently in his home had become the catalyst for bringing everything back to life, including him. "Ready, Dr. Blackwood?" Julian asked as they reached the conference room door. Nora's smile, confident, brilliant, no longer hidden, was answer enough. "Ready, Mr. Westbrook." Together, they stepped forward into a future neither had imagined when a reclusive tech mogul had accidentally noticed his invisible housekeeper studying the neglected gardens from his office window. Sometimes, Julian reflected, the most extraordinary discoveries happened when you finally opened your eyes to what had been there all along.